What if the things you're like most deeply grateful for, your family, your career, your natural talents, are actually the exact things creating an impenetrable wall between you and spiritual reality?
Oh man, that is a genuinely terrifying thought.
It really is. But when you step into the world of A.W. Tozer, you quickly realize he isn't interested in making us comfortable. I mean, he wants to wake us up.
He really does.
So, welcome to the Deep Dive. Today we're looking at Tozer's 1948 classic, The Pursuit of God. And right off the bat, if you hear that title and immediately brace yourself for some dusty academic theological textbook, you can let your guard down. Tozer was not some monk living in a silent cave.
No, far from it. He wrote this as a really busy, active pastor working right in the middle of the chaotic, endless grid of Chicago.
Right, he was in the thick of it.
Exactly. And he was observing this growing hunger in people for something visceral. He saw congregations full of people who were just tired of having the correct interpretations of Scripture or endlessly going through the motions of, organized religious programs.
Yeah, they didn't want to just look at a map of a mountain anymore. They wanted to actually stand on the edge of the cliff and feel the freezing wind whip their faces. They wanted the actual experience of the divine.
That's a perfect way to put it.
And our mission today is to distill Tozer's insights on how to cut through the modern noise, strip away the artificial parts of our inner lives, and actually experience that presence of God in our everyday routines.
It's a huge mission, but he lays it out so clearly.
Okay, let's unpack this, because before we even get to the actionable steps of finding God, Tozer starts at a really counterintuitive place. He says we aren't even the ones initiating this search.
Yeah, he uses a theological term here called prevenient grace. And the mechanism is quite beautiful, honestly.
So,
Well, Tozer argues that before a sinful person can think a single right thought about God, there has to be this secret, invisible work of enlightenment already happening inside them. Like, we pursue God only because he first put an urge within us that spurs us to the pursuit.
oh wow, so the impulse originates entirely with him. We are literally just reacting.
Right. That's the idea. It completely removes every vestige of human ego or credit for the act of coming to God. The magnetic draw is his,
Right.
but the active positive reciprocation, the choice to actually follow hard after him, well, that is our part.
But as soon as we start following that urge, we hit a massive psychological roadblock. And Tozer diagnoses this as a fundamental human sickness.
Yeah, he calls it the malady of possession.
Right.
Originally, Tozer points out, the human heart was meant to be a shrine where none but God was worthy to come. But human nature introduced some serious complications.
To say the least.
God was forced out of that central shrine, and things were allowed to enter. You can see the symptoms of this deep disease in our language. Just think about how fiercely, how defensively we use the pronouns my and mine.
It's so true. My house, my job, my time.
Exactly. Our roots have grown deeply down into our things, and we are absolutely terrified of anyone pulling them up.
So the gifts literally usurp the giver. God gives us something good, and we put it on the throne instead of him.
Yeah, and the ultimate example Tozer uses to illustrate the psychology of this is the Old Testament story of Abraham and Isaac.
Oh, this is such an intense story.
It really is. You have to understand the context here. Abraham was an incredibly old man when his son Isaac was born.
Yeah.
This child wasn't just a son. He was the literal, physical fulfillment of all of God's promises to Abraham.
Right.
So as the boy grew, Abraham's love became so intense, so consuming, that it bordered on the perilous.
His heart was knit so closely to the boy that it became almost a perverted love. The child became an idol.
Exactly. And God actually had to step in to save them both from this spiritual sickness. He commands Abraham to take Isaac up a mountain and offer him as a sacrifice.
Just unimaginably hard.
Tozer asks us to imagine the sheer mortal agony of that night. Just the bent form of this old man wrestling under the stars, facing the loss of the one thing he loved more than life itself.
He had to make a choice.
He had to choose between the gift and the giver. But the secret of the story, the actual mechanism of how this surrender works, is that once Abraham made the agonizing choice in his heart to surrender his son,
Once he completely yielded up his possessive, suffocating grip.
right, God stopped him. God let Isaac live.
Yeah.
Abraham got to keep his son, his wealth, and his life. But he no longer possessed them in his inner shrine. They were now external to him.
It really makes me think of holding a bird in your hands. If you grip it too tightly out of this desperate, anxious fear of losing it, you crush it.
You kill the very thing you love.
Yeah. By opening his hands, Abraham actually got to keep everything, just in a healthy, sustainable way.
Exactly.
But wait, holding the bird loosely makes sense in theory, but let's be real here. If I love my child, or my career, or my health, there is something deeply hardwired in me that wants to possess it. Like surrender goes against our basic human survival instinct.
Well, this raises an important question. And Tozer entirely acknowledges that resistance. The problem isn't just our physical possessions or the people we love. The deeper, much more insidious problem is what he calls the veil of the self-life.
The self-life.
Yeah, it is the hyphenated sins of the human spirit. Self-righteousness, self-pity, self-confidence, self-sufficiency, self-admiration.
Wow, that's quite a list.
Notice that these aren't just bad things we do, they are something we are. And together they form this thick, opaque veil that actively blocks the face of God from our experience.
And he does not sugarcoat how we get rid of this veil. He says we cannot just accept a neat, lazy, philosophical doctrine of self-crucifixion. I mean, he writes that this veil is made of living spiritual tissue.
It is the sentient, quivering stuff of which our beings consist. To tear it away is not some pleasant, poetic idea. It injures us. It hurts. It makes us bleed.
The cross is deadly.
Yeah, and it must do its violent work in our inner lives to extract this tough old miser of the ego.
Which brings up the obvious question of what that actually looks like in our daily routines. Like, we aren't literally tearing a fabric curtain. How does a person in the modern world actually experience the tearing of this veil?
Because this veil is made of our ego and our self-preservation, tearing it means actively choosing not to defend yourself when you're unfairly criticized.
Oh, that's hard.
It really is. It means letting someone else take the credit for a project you poured your heart into at work without, whispering to your boss that it was actually your idea.
I feel that. In that moment, your ego feels like it is physically bleeding out. Your sense of self-importance just screams in protest.
Exactly. That real visceral sting of a bruised ego that is the tearing Tozer is talking about.
Wow. Okay, so if we actually manage to endure that ego bleed, if we allow our obsession with ourselves and our things to be ripped away, what is the payoff? Like, how do we actually perceive the divine once that veil is gone?
That is the pivotal shift in Tozer's entire framework. He moves from what we have to remove to what we can finally experience.
And here's where it gets really interesting. Tozer asserts that God is an objective reality. He isn't just an abstract ideal or another name for human goodness or some philosophical deduction where we sit in an armchair and say, well, the universe exists, therefore a creator must exist.
No, Tozer argues that we have actual latent spiritual faculties. Just as we have 5 physical senses that allow us to engage with the material world, to feel the wind, to taste food, hear music, we have spiritual senses designed to literally taste and see the spiritual world.
But they're asleep.
Unused and dead for every practical purpose. They're numbed by the veil of the self-life we just talked about.
Right.
But once they are quickened by the Holy Spirit, and once that veil is torn, we can engage the spiritual world with the exact same certainty that we engage the physical world of wind, rain, and rocks.
But that begs a massive question. If God is this objective reality and we literally possess the internal hardware to sense him, why do so many people, even devout, practicing religious people, feel like God is a million miles away?
Tozer explains this by drawing a critical distinction between God's omnipresence and his manifest presence.
Okay, break that down for us.
Well, omnipresence simply means God is everywhere. It's a theological fact. There is no point in the universe nearer to God than any other point. But his manifest presence is when we are actually consciously aware of him.
He uses the story of Jacob in the wilderness for this, right?
He does. Jacob wakes up from a dream in the middle of a desolate, howling wilderness and cries out, "Surely the Lord is in this place, and I knew it not."
So God was always there.
Totally enclosing him the entire time he was asleep. The reality of God's presence didn't change at all. What changed was Jacob's spiritual receptivity. He suddenly had the capacity to notice what was already there.
It's like we are swimming in an ocean, completely surrounded by water, and we are complaining that we are thirsty.
That's a great analogy.
And Tozer pushes this immediacy even further with his concept of the speaking voice. He says the universe was created by God speaking, and here is the kicker. That voice never stopped. The Bible isn't a book God spoke once, thousands of years ago, closed, and then went completely silent.
Right. Tozer argues the Bible is a book God is currently speaking. The voice is a continuous present reality filling the cosmos.
That's mind-blowing.
The phrase God said in the book of Genesis isn't just a historical record of how things started. It accounts for the fact that things are still holding together today. The voice is the living, vibrating potentiality in all of nature.
But if the universe is literally vibrating with this continuous voice right now, why on earth are we all missing it? Are we just that distracted?
What's fascinating here is Tozer's critique of modern psychology, which rings even truer today than it did in 1948. We have completely lost the art of being still.
Oh, for sure.
We live in a heavily secularized age where our thought habits automatically default to the scientific, the rational, or the cynical over the spiritual. Tozer points out an incredible moment in the New Testament. When God literally spoke to Jesus out of heaven, the self-centered men standing right next to him explained it away by saying, "It thundered."
They rationalize the voice of the divine into a weather event.
And we do the exact same thing. We experience a sudden sense of awe, a flash of profound peace, or a distinct internal nudge, and we immediately explain it away as a weird mood or a chemical release in the brain.
Right, you dismiss it.
Exactly. Receptivity requires intentional cultivation. It requires a deliberate quietness.
And think about how much harder that is for you and me today. I mean, Tozer thought 1948 was noisy. We are dealing with algorithms specifically designed to harvest our attention, constant notifications, infinite scrolling. Noise isn't just an annoyance anymore. It is our default cultural setting.
Which is why Tozer insists we have to actively break away from the relentless assault of visible things if we want those spiritual faculties to tune in to the speaking voice.
Okay, so we know we have to tune in, we have to cultivate the stillness, but doing that sounds like it requires a PhD in theology or mastering ancient Greek or moving to a silent monastery in the mountains. How does an average person with a mortgage and a day job actually tune in?
The beauty of Tozer's theology is that it requires the exact opposite of academic complexity.
Mhm.
It requires absolute, radical simplicity.
Which brings us to his definition of faith. He says faith isn't a complex, hair-splitting psychological exercise where you try to force yourself to believe impossible things. Faith is simply the gaze of a soul upon a saving God. It is just looking.
Yeah, and to prove how simple this mechanism is, he unpacks a strange story from the Old Testament book of Numbers. The Israelites were wandering in the wilderness and were being bitten by deadly, venomous serpents.
Sounds terrifying.
Panic is spreading, people are dying. And God tells Moses to make a serpent out of brass and put it high up on a pole.
And the cure for the venom wasn't some complex ritual.
No, not at all. God didn't ask them to perform a deeply emotional ceremony. He didn't ask them to pass a theology exam on why the serpents were there in the first place. He simply said that anyone who is bitten, when they just look at the brass serpent, shall live. Looking and believing are the exact same mechanism.
You just lift your inward eyes to behold him.
And the brilliant psychological side effect of this is that faith becomes the least self-regarding of all virtues. Think about the human eye. Your eye sees everything else in front of it, the trees, the sky, the people around you. But the one thing the eye cannot see is itself.
Oh, it's so good.
True faith operates the exact same way. It is entirely occupied with God. When you look at God, you finally, blissfully stop looking at yourself.
And that brings massive relief. Tozer spends a lot of time talking about the heavy, crushing burden of humanity. And he isn't talking about physical labor or paying the bills. He is talking about the psychological burden of pride, pretense, and artificiality. We spend our entire lives exhausted, defending our touchy, fragile egos. We pretend to be smarter, richer, or more cultured than we actually are, terrified that someone will find out our secret inner emptiness.
The psychology created by years of hiding, comparing ourselves to others, and managing our personal brand slowly kills us from the inside out.
It's like spending your entire life walking around sucking your stomach in. It's utterly exhausting. You can't relax for a single second because someone might see the real you.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, this is where Tozer introduces his profoundly liberating view of meekness. When Jesus promises rest for the soul, it isn't a vacation to the beach. It's the rest of meekness.
Right.
And the meek person isn't a human mouse, afflicted with a pathetic inferiority complex. The meek person is simply someone who accepts God's estimate of their own life.
They stop being fooled about themselves.
Exactly. They drop the exhausting pretense. They stop caring what the world thinks. They stop trying to project a flawless image, and they let God be the one to defend them. And letting go of that heavy artificial armor brings an ultimate profound rest for the soul.
Okay, that sounds incredible. I mean, I want to drop the pretense. I want that deep psychological rest. But here is the major tension for me, and probably for anyone listening. How do we keep this continuous gaze on God when we live in the messy, demanding real world?
That's the challenge, right?
Yeah, we have to go to work, pay taxes, do the laundry, answer 100 emails a day. Doesn't the very nature of the real world inevitably yank us away from this continuous spiritual state?
That is the trap almost every modern person falls into, and Tozer addresses it with perhaps his most practical, life-altering point in the entire book. He completely destroys the sacred-secular divide.
We have to explain how he does that because the implications are huge.
Throughout history, we have been culturally conditioned to divide our lives into two separate, watertight compartments. On one side, we have sacred acts, praying, reading the Bible, singing hymns, volunteering at a charity. We believe these acts please God.
And on the other side,
On the other side, we have secular acts, eating, sleeping, commuting to work, paying taxes, doing the dishes. We view these as necessary evils of the flesh that have absolutely nothing to do with our spiritual lives.
we think God cares about the hour we spend in church, but is completely indifferent to the 8 hours we spend analyzing spreadsheets.
Exactly. But Tozer argues that this duality has absolutely no foundation in the New Testament. It is a man-made psychological prison.
He points out that the Apostle Paul sewing literal canvas tents to make a living was just as acceptable and pleasing to God as Paul writing the epistle to the Romans. And even Jesus himself took on a real physical human body. He ate meals, he slept, he walked dusty roads, he worked with his hands as a carpenter. His physical presence in human flesh proves once and for all that the physical body and our daily prosaic tasks are not inherently offensive or unholy to God.
Because the mechanism that transforms an act from secular to sacred is entirely about the motive. If your internal motive is to glorify God, then planting a garden in your backyard can be as holy an act as winning a soul or preaching a sermon.
Wow.
The great error of humanity was reverting back to the Old Testament system.
How so?
Well, back in the Old Testament, God had to use designated holy days, holy vessels, and specific holy places, like the inner room of the temple, to teach a pagan-influenced Israel the very concept of holiness.
Yeah,
It was an elementary school object lesson.
right.
But when Christ came, the veil of the temple was literally torn in half. The Old Testament schooling was over. Holiness was released into the whole world. When we go backward and start marking out specific holy days and holy places again, we create a fractured, divided psychology.
We end up feeling guilty and uneasy most of the time because we spend the vast majority of our lives just doing normal secular things.
Precisely.
So what does this all mean? How do we apply this today? It means you don't need to quit your job and become a monk in a monastery to live a deeply spiritual life. Tozer says that by intentionally offering all your acts to God, even the incredibly mundane, repetitive ones, you can turn your entire life into one continuous sacrament.
The motive changes everything.
It really does. With the right internal orientation, your office cubicle, your kitchen sink, or your commute in traffic can literally become a sanctuary. It is an aggressive, joyful faith that insists every act of every single hour is included in your worship.
It creates a restful, seamless unity of life. The painful duality collapses. You no longer feel like you are toggling between your spiritual self and your work self. You realize that God has received all of you and rejected nothing.
Let's quickly retrace the map we've been exploring today. We started with the painful necessity of releasing our possessive, suffocating grip on our things and tearing away the living tissue of our self-righteous ego.
A tearing that feels like an emotional injury, but ultimately allows our dormant spiritual senses to awaken to God's manifest presence and to tune into his continuous, universe-sustaining speaking voice.
We learned that tuning into that voice isn't some complicated psychological trick. It is just the simple, continuous gaze of the soul upon God. And that simple gaze frees us from the exhausting, life-draining burden of pretense and ego management.
Leading us into the true rest of the meek, where we finally accept ourselves for who we actually are and tear down that artificial, guilt-inducing wall between the sacred and the secular.
This deep dive is ultimately a personal invitation for you. It's an invitation to step off that exhausting treadmill of pretending to be someone you aren't, constantly defending your ego from criticism, and anxiously separating your spiritual life from your real life. You can experience the genuine relief of the meek, finding rest by simply accepting God's reality.
And I want to leave you with a final thought to mull over as you go about the rest of your day. If Tozer is right, and there is genuinely no such thing as a secular act when your heart is aimed at God, Think about the absolute most boring, repetitive, or unglamorous task you have to do today. Maybe it's folding a mountain of laundry or sitting in a budget meeting. How would your internal experience of that exact same task change if you decided right before you started that you were going to perform it as a sacred priestly ministration?
Put down the topographical map, step to the edge of a cliff, feel the wind in your face, and step into the reality of the mountain. See you next time.